CARICOM as they do to Guyana, Suriname, and Belize, namely of the forestry sector. So a lot of discussions have been, if you follow the debate, have been on whether this COP will be effective. Many of the leaders are now going, having gone to Glasgow last year, and many of them made a slew of commitments. And much has happened since Glasgow to now. And a lot of what has happened has not been favorable or in keeping with the commitments that were made by these leaders. In fact, we've had a downright reversal to the detriment of the climate and the targets set by many of these countries. Countries that led the fight to ban coal as the dirtiest of fossil fuels, today have restarted coal-fired power plants in their countries. We've seen countries saying that there should be no further investment in oil and gas sector, that the assets will be stranded, and it's inconsistent with a net zero scenario. And those countries now are urging the oil producers to produce even more. In fact, some of the producers were threatened by the United States of America because they wanted to cut production, namely Saudi Arabia. So clearly, the theme of this COP and the two areas that coming out, there's a consensus in the developing countries that should be focused on heavily, would be solidarity, and solidarity largely with the African continent, because this COP is held in Africa, and it's and we know that the countries of Africa, they're some of the smallest contributors to the current concentration of greenhouse gases, but they face some of the most dire consequences of climate change. And that all the promises that were made to Africa and other developing countries, particularly in the Kyoto Protocol and all the other COPs since, namely with assistance to transition to greener energy, to support adaptation, and to provide at least $100 billion a year to support their efforts. Much of that, though, that help has not materialized. And so clearly, we have to give solidarity with those countries that are suffering the most from climate change, and we have to have greater accountability on the part of the developed world. Prior to COP26, I spoke at Rice University, and I said we were worried about a spate of greenwashing, where there was a hype just before COP26, and lots of conferences, pledges, declarations. And my fear then was that all of this energy and enthusiasm would dissipate after COP26. And this materialized. So the countries, the developed world, cannot keep lecturing the developing world about sustainability and meeting targets, and then make pledges but not fulfill them. So clearly, this COP has to be about accountability on the part of the developed world. The $100 billion promised since 2009 has to be delivered. They promised in COP26 that they would double adaptation funding. We have to see how this will materialize. What's the specific mechanism, not just for providing the funds, but ensuring fast intermediation of these funds to the most needy countries. They promise there being very grave reluctance to deal with an issue that is critical to small island developing states, particularly CARICOM. And CARICOM has been championing this, the loss and damage, provision of funds for loss and damage. So we will have to push the emitters, the major emitters, to commit to this pledge of the target of 1.5 degree. Right now, instead of us moving closer to the target, we are moving further away from it because of what has happened. There's simply not been enough money spent on renewable energy globally. Although it has increased significantly, it's not enough to displace the use of fossil fuel. And the demand is growing for energy, and if the renewable supply is not there, then that demand will be met by increase in fossil fuel production. And that's the reality of the current world. So clearly, this is important for us. Forest too, outside of the pledge that was made to eliminate deforestation by 2030 and signed on to last year in Glasgow, there has to be greater incentives for the forest countries. Countries that are providing a major global good by not just cutting deforestation rates, but also extracting large amounts of CO2 from the atmosphere. In Guyana's case, as you know, it's estimated that our forests extract about 154 million tons of carbon per annum, which is more than, say, 3 or 4 major European countries combined their emissions. It's estimated that a single FPSO would emit about 1.8 million tons of carbon per year, and we are extracting from the atmosphere 154 million tons per annum. So although we are increasing the production of oil, we still will remain a net zero country, in fact a carbon negative country, even with us producing 1 million barrels of oil per day. So clearly the role of forests has to be recognized. Since the PPP got back into office, we have launched a new expanded LCDS, and we have been working to get our forest carbon certified. We've listed with the ARC registry, the Architecture for Red Plush Transactions, and now we're in the process of certifying in excess of 30 million credits. We've made it known that we've solicited offers for the sale of the credit. We've discussed this publicly, and at the NTC we had a buy-in from the two shouts, all of the declaration in support of this, where 15% of all the proceeds raised from the sale of forest carbon, including forest carbon from 2060, the legacy carbon, that the 15% will go to the indigenous communities. So we are working here aggressively at trying to make that happen, and hopefully before the end of the year you will see major progress in that front. So we are not sitting down waiting for progress at COP. We're not sitting down waiting for progress. We're doing our bit on climate change. We had, earned in excess of 200 million from Norway to the sale of forest carbon. In a short while, we will go out to tender for about 35 megawatts of solar energy for the grids in Lingen, in Berbice and Essequibo. And we are also utilizing nearly $100 million remaining from that very same fund to go towards adaptation efforts, where we had public consultations on D&I systems to manage water in regions 2, 3, 5, and 6, similar to the structures like we built at Hope Canal in region 4 to manage more water from conservancies and backland so that they would avoid flooding. So some of those funds will be programmed there. So we're taking this seriously, our obligations to. On the climate side, we made it clear that with the gas to energy project, with a Myla and with the solar, or the mix of energy will see us triple capacity in the country that is generating capacity and yet cut carbon emissions from that sector by 70%. And we're committed to that. And we're committed on the biodiversity front, all of this. So I just wanted to say to you, we will be represented at COP. We will be speaking out in solidarity of the developing world. There is one thing that is important. We have to support the developing world on is a just transition to clean energy. Because we have seen some agencies like the United Nations, in a very doctrinaire manner, been calling for a ban on oil and gas production, and some other places. The IEA said it's inconsistent with a net zero scenario, a few other than multilateral. But the developed world doesn't listen to them. They can't force the developed world to go that route. When the UK reopens a gas-fired power plant, or the United States expand shale production, oil from shale, they can't say anything. But they try to almost bully the countries in Africa and Asia, the developing world, into doing this. So we're not going to succumb to the bullying. Africa needs the energy for its people, and it has oil and gas. And so Europe can build a greater infrastructure to bring in more gas because the price has escalated in Europe. So they want more gas produced from other parts of the world to come and supply Europe so you could get the prices down. But Africa must supply Europe but can't use the gas for its own development and to bring power to the 600-700 million people, many who live in Africa and India and others. And then there are 1 billion people who don't have even electricity today. So we're not going to succumb to that. Secondly, those countries' per capita income are a fraction of the developed world. Yet they are the ones who have to be responsible for climate change. It seems as though the burden of being responsible falls only on the developing world shoulders. And they're the least contributor to the problem. So that is why you've seen a big fight pushed back from many countries in the world, particularly the African continent, and many leaders there. You see the strident speeches and stuff, and they're absolutely right. We had that same issue in Guyana about oil and gas development, and we made it clear that if the world needs the fossil fuel, and it will need 25 million barrels even in a net zero scenario, what is to say that we in the developed world shouldn't produce that? Because the developed world has used their quota 10 times over. And if they ban us from developing these resources, all of those who are advocating for the bans, the NGOs and the UN-based agencies, they're asking for a monopoly for those producers. So we've had our battles here, and our position is clearly outlined in our low carbon development strategy. We're not doing things in a doctrinaire manner. It must be in a just, fair manner, and ultimately it must benefit our people as well as the world. It must be globally responsible. And I think we're practicing both. We're one of the few countries that have put a carbon tax on the oil and gas flaring. But we have a net zero flaring policy, but should there be any flaring, there is a tax on it, based on the carbon emitted. And we are pushing the companies to explore cleaner technology with every successive FPSO. So that's the first issue. This brings me to the oil and gas sector. As you know, we are, let me deal quickly with the gas energy project, and I'll bring you up to date where we are. So we've received bids. The evaluation has been completed for the consultancy group to manage the project, and a contract has been awarded by the cabinet. You can get details about that later from the Ministry of Natural Resources, but that's completed. We've had tenders for the EPC, that is to build the power plant and the NGL facility. You've seen the tenders, the price that we've had. We hired, once we received the tenders, we then hired 2 international firms, Stantec from the United States, from Canada, and Worley from the UK, to help us to evaluate the technical aspects of the bid, because we don't have that expertise, so we utilized 2 international firms, and we wanted 2. So they worked separately, so we could then compare their evaluation at a single meeting. They didn't meet, they didn't collaborate, they just did the evaluation separately, and then we brought them together to compare. We now benefited, we have those evaluation reports, and we have now named our evaluation team, so they have the benefit of those reports. They're working now through the evaluation process, and hopefully within a matter of a week or 2, we will then get a recommendation, which will then go to the cabinet for approval. So that is the process. That's where we are now on that project. Separately, we are going to go out soon for the transmission name to bring the power across from Wales to a substation in Eccles, and then to distribute around the country. So that will be tendered shortly. You will see that bid going out for the long lead items, and then for the whole EPC contract. So that is part of that. That's bringing you up to date here. Now we had for some time now said that we were going to have the auction done by the end of September, launch a bid round. Now this is consistent with a promise we made in opposition that future blocks will be given out only through auction. We're not going to do this directly, except if it's a state-to-state engagement with the government participating. So there were several there's a lot of preparatory work that we had to complete before we launched the bid round. And we've had intense work done in the ministry, and we've hired some consultants. IHS Markit has been working with us as the lead consultant to take us to the auction. So today, Cabinet approved the the auction, and I'm going to briefly tell you about some of the conditions under which the auction would be done. And hopefully by the end of the day, the ministry will issue a press release based on the discussions at the cabinet today. Now, we're not launching the bid today, but we didn't want this to come out in a manner how things come out through leaks, etc. That is why cabinet just met, and I've decided to tell you exactly what we are planning, so that you know, and the prospective bidders will also know some of the terms of the auction, even long before the auction is launched formally. But the ministry will issue a release later. So the first, we've decided to auction 14 blocks. And these 14 blocks would range from about 1,000 square kilometers to about 3,000 square kilometers, each block, with the majority of them being closer to 2,000 square kilometers. 11 of these will be in the shallow area and 3 in the deep, the area C. The new fiscal regime, which will now govern not only the award and the contracts that we will sign with the bidders who were successful, but will govern all of the subsequent PSAs that we will sign for any other exploration that's already taken place in the other areas, the Kite Shore and the other areas. So the 50 profit sharing will be retained. The 50%, yeah, so 50. The royalty rate will go to 10%. There shall be a corporate tax of 10%. The maximum for any given year going to cost oil will be 65%. These are the key fiscal conditions. Now, the PSA, we have the consultants working to strengthen the PSA to be ready before the auction is concluded, because we have to strengthen the PSA in many areas, and these are the PSA will be amended to reflect these new fiscal terms too. But the strengthening will take place the entire PSA. The laws of the country will also be amended to reflect, where necessary, to reflect what I just said. So, for example, the Petroleum Act, if there is anything inconsistent in the Petroleum Act with what I just mentioned, that will be amended. Now, the IHS Markit is a global consultant, and they have their pulse on the industry. We currently have about 65 countries in this 2022 who are in a bid round or launching one. So it's a lot of countries around the world that are doing this now. So it's very competitive globally, 65 countries. We know already that the funds are are scarce, largely because of net zero targets. It's harder to raise money now for the oil and gas sector. We've had cases where loans are vetoed. So it's becoming more and more difficult to finance the oil and gas sector. We have seen globally from these international oil companies where about 70 and 8 to 80% historically of their total corporate capex used to go to upstream activities. By 2025, this will drop to just over 60%. So they themselves are putting less, reflecting that risk. They're putting less money into exploration. Many of them are not, they're selling off assets globally. So we had to, given what we wanted at the beginning, a greater share of the revenue for the government and people of Guyana, for Guyana, which we believe we will succeed in with this new fiscal formula, a significantly greater share of the proceeds. We wanted, that was one of our objectives. But the second objective was to remain globally competitive and to accelerate the exploration in the context of net zero. So we looked at the spectrum of countries and total government take, starting with those that have very small take and those that have major ones. We opted for a simple formula with fixed royalties. Fixed royalties, some countries have variable royalty depending on the internal rate of return of the project, etc. So we did not go down to a complex system because it's harder to monitor those. The fixed royalty also protects you against the downside when oil prices drop. So you get this. If you have a variable royalty, then when oil prices drop, you lose. So I'm not going to go into all the justifications, just to say that we opted for a simple system, which can be understood by everyone. So IHS Market that worked with us and did most of the simulations. Internally we did them, and then they're verified and they did simulations as to what the total take will be. They assured us at these levels, although they may seem high to some people, that these levels, the 10% royalty, the 10% corporate tax, and that we remain very competitive, So I just want to give you an example of how this will work. So under the current PSA, the gross revenue every year, now when at the beginning of the contract, this is before you've fully covered cap cost. 75% goes to cost oil and 25% to profit oil, of which we get 12.5%, and then we get another 2% of royalty. So we get 14.5%. The company gets, that's of gross. The company now in the early years, they get 10.5. That takes you up to the 25% available for distribution as profit and royalty. Under the current scenario, with a cap of 65%, 35% remains to be divided. So at a 50-50 profit share, you get 17.5% of the gross, and then another 10% royalty. So you get 27.5%. So of the gross at the beginning. And then you have the 10% on the profit. So this is how it it will work. So it shifts significantly. So this now, as I said before, IHS Market has been our advisors, and they said even with this, we're very competitive, and we're also, our basin has been de-risked, fines here, etc. Major. I'm not gonna go much more. So, because later we'll come back to this. So we're, on the bid itself, who will be allowed to bid? So we decided to get the bids more competitive. We will allow local and foreigners to international companies to bid. So there will be minimum technical qualifications for the technical and financial qualifications for the bids. So they have to meet these. We don't want them to be too onerous, but people have to meet some minimum qualifications. The qualifications will be more stringent for the ultra deep area, the 3 blocks in the ultra deep area, because it required only few companies can really work there. So the pre-qualification, or not the qualification, but the minimum requirements there to bid will be much greater than in the shallow. We're putting in there a minimum signature bonus of $20 million per block in the ultra deep area, and it will be $10 million in the shallow area. So that will be a financial minimum, that whoever bids, that is the lowest you can come in. If you win a bid, you'd have to pay that money over as a signing bonus. So we are now restricting how many blocks you can bid for. But we have decided to limit the award to 3, to any company for a maximum of 3. So whilst you can tender for all the blocks, but you would have to do so and list your preferences. So we get a more competitive bidding for all the blocks. But the award to a company will not be more than 3 blocks. Maximum will be 3 blocks. Each bidder will be required to put up a work program, because the criteria for assessing the bids will be weighted between the price and the work program. So the work program will have to hold them, have a guarantee that they will actually meet the work program. So we plan to, let me tell you something before, let me go to another point before I come back, so you can understand that. So we are going to tighten up relinquishment provisions. In the deep, it's because of the complexity, you would have 10 years. So at first, initial 3 years for both shallow and deep for the seismic. And at that time, when you move on to phase 2 now, after the first 3 years, you have to relinquish 50% of the block. So you have 3 years to do all your seismic and then relinquish 50% of the block, both for shallow and deep. Then we'll give 2 extensions, to 1-year extensions to the shallow. So that takes you to 5 years to move on with the work program. We are doing this because we want a greater turnover. We don't want people to sit on the blocks. we want, and if this comes back to government, it can then go in subsequent auctions. So we can then keep rolling them into subsequent auctions. So this is important, and the same thing will happen at the deep, where they will have a 10-year period. But so to go back to the point I was making, the financial commitment now. So when you put in your bid, you have to say, I plan to spend 30 million on seismic in the first 3 years. So you will get assessed on that on the signature bonus, how much you bid. But if you don't spend the money, you then have to, it becomes a penalty. The government you will then have to remit 30 million to the government and you lose the block. So this is to prevent people taking a block and sitting on it for 3 years, and then at the end of the 3 years you hear, we can't do anything, we move forward, we need to relinquish it. The country has lost 3 years from potential development. That is how it will work. So you will now, in the award, when the contract is awarded, you'll have to put up a guarantee for at least 20% of your financial, or work commitment. And this is trying to solve, if you notice, it's trying to solve a lot of the problems we've had in other areas too, where people just sat on these and then they relinquish them after a long period. So it will help. And it's not inconsistent with global practice. All of this, we've been assured by IHS Markit that these are very consistent with international practices. Now, the one issue I mentioned, I did not mention that we had problems with, that a lot of criticism. So it was on the royalty, the taxes, it was about the 75% being used, for cost oil, and then it was about ring fencing. So we were exploring two models. You ring fence around fields or projects, or the contract. So we've decided now, the contract, you ring fence around the contract. And it is, the reason why this is possible is because the area is small. The area now is small compared to the larger block, say like in the Stabroek block. So you don't need to ring fence around projects. You can ring fence in the contract area. And we're told that it's the most efficient way because it will allow the developers to maximize the projects there within an area, not leave stranded resources. So these are, we expect the bid round to be launched soon and to last for about 5 months to be completed. So we have promised this, and Cabinet today went through these details, and you're going to have people, as usual, some who believe we're too harsh, the industry, and we're taking too much, and then you're going to have others who complain about it. We should have taken everything under the sun. So this is the way forward now. It is something that we promised in opposition to, and it's done. No. So maybe I should deal more with some political issues now. Yeah, I don't want me talking a little too much on those issues. So we've seen a lot of long, useless statements emanating from the office of the leader of the opposition and from the AFC. And it seems as though they have an opinion on everything, but But it also seems as though they're living, or they were living in a different planet, and they just arrived back here in 2020. And so let me take you through what I mean. You know, so we've seen Mr. Norton recently. Mr. Norton spoke about and Ankati use, of all people, spoke about the PPP engaging in a borrowing spree and a spending spree. Now, generally, I don't listen to Cathy Hughes, but it's shameful that someone who's been in Parliament so long, who's called herself a minister, would not even pay any attention to the facts, nor would try to educate herself about how an economy works. So what are the facts? The facts are here. I have a table I asked to look at debt to GDP ratio, because your debt is relative. It's always relative to something else. So the debt in 1991 to GDP ratio was over 600%. That is the debt to GDP ratio. So the national debt was 6 times the size of our economy. In 2022, it's projected to be 24% of our economy. So Cathy's complained that the debt is over $3 billion now. In the 90s, just in the same period, it was $2 billion, $2 billion at that time. And our income was, for example, if you look at GDP, was 45 times smaller than what it is today. 45 times smaller than it is today. The GDP at that time was about $300 odd million US dollars. Now it's about $14.3 billion. If you look at it, that is it. So our economy has increased 45 times since those days. But in the early days, when our economy was 45 times smaller, our debt was $2 billion US dollars in 1990 money. That is, if you look at the time value of money, we'll run into 10, maybe $5-6 billion today, if you had to look at the time value of money. So clearly, I don't want to get into complex analyses for Cathy Hughes and the others. It's a waste of time, total, and others are doing this in the public domain. But what are we spending on? What are we borrowing to do? We're now borrowing to give contract to yourselves, like she did in her own ministry. Her company was tendering for work in her ministry, and she was signing the checks from our company, and then maybe possibly signing the checks from the ministry to, I don't know, to the company. That is her history. We didn't use it to consume or buy fancy vehicles for people. We're putting this money into 6 new hospitals, that will start soon. And a seventh, which is a children and maternal hospital. Those alone will cost us nearly 400 million US dollars. We've just we're going to the board for the IDB to rehabilitate New Amsterdam, Linden, and Georgetown hospitals. We are going to build 4 new diagnostic centers, world-class diagnostic centers in regions 1, 7, 8, and 9, and with a telemedicine facility. That's where the money is going. It's going on the highways that are critical for future investment. 4-lane highway on the East Coast, a 4-lane highway on the East Bank. It's 4-lane highway on the West Coast. Same thing will happen in Region 6. It's going to build bridges. These are the things of the future. It's not a consumption-based philosophy that we have. If you invest your resources, you borrow to invest, and you have the capacity to repay. Now, we have capacity now to repay because the debt has been coming down in relation to GDP. Then you're preparing for future growth. APNU lives for the day. That is why they've cut the capital budget from 2014 to 2020. Every single year, you check it out. We spent less on capital works in this country than in 2014. Didn't matter to them. What mattered was rental of buildings. What mattered was rental of buildings from people, their cronies. 12.5 million to rent a bottom house down in Georgetown to do a drug bomb. A month, that's a month. All the fancy trips, ministers and everything getting a special thing that this government discontinued. You recall the ministers had an insurance scheme for their health care under APNU, they and their families, where they will go to Ireland and the state was supposed to pay half of the premium and they will pay the other half. Most of them never paid the other half. The state paid for it all. That has been discontinued now. So when you talk about debt stock, this country was totally bankrupt. Everyone knows that. We've moved from a bankrupt country and they like to quote international organizations. So this is what the IMF said in the Article 4 consultations, which was published in September of this year. So they're quoting some World Bank report in October, but forgot that the IMF issued a report. The IMF said total gross public debt has declined significantly over the past decade, driven by repayments and prudent debt management. Ghana's total public sector debt declined to 42.9% of GDP in 2021, and this including central government guarantee of NISIL's $16.5 billion of syndicated loans that APNU took from 57.7% of GDP in 2011. So this was just published September of this year. But Cathy Hughes, or bright economist Cathy Hughes, goes to say spending spree and borrowing spree. I guess what hurts them is that the country is making progress. So things are happening. The government is investing to create the basis for a future economy that will be robust, where people can find jobs and they can do well in the economy. And since they never had a plan, they couldn't have done that. And so they're kind of remorseful about it maybe. But this is the reality. So I will not take anything that Cathy Hughes says at face value. This was the same person who was trying to rig the elections. She was trying to rig the elections in, you recall her by the convention center. I see some smiles here, I know what happened there. One of the riggers, and a ton more things will come out soon about, or maybe next week I'll deal with that. So yes, let's go on and deal with that on the debt, because I see that's the new thing now. People keep talking about it, the debt. That sustainability is always important for us in the BP, but it's also relative to where we are, and we made it clear that when these infrastructure, it's the same thing like the sovereign wealth fund. When we build out the infrastructure, our power plants and our ports and our roads and our hospitals and schools, then you'll see a sharp decline in public expenditure. But now they have to. So Norton talks about poverty, but he doesn't want you to tackle the things that really, in the long run, would address poverty, which is a diversified, robust economy, not just reliant on oil and gas, which is what we're trying to do to put in the infrastructure for. So even the agricultural sector, the intermediate savannas, opening up new crops, etc. And it is a solid, robust social sector where we are investing in people's health and education. So Norton quoted, he discovered, someone sent him this document, and he discovered the World Bank report. And he made a big issue about it. Guyana Nationals had come, and he read it out. This is what he read at his press conference. So he spoke about the population living below $5.5 a day is among the highest in Latin America and the Caribbean region at around 48%. Poverty rates are highest in the sparsely populated interior hinterland, where communities have limited access to economic opportunities. And then he said this, in less than 2 years, the PPP government has brought this country to a point where inequality and poverty have climbed. So the World Bank issued a clarification on their report. And the World Bank said, we're talking about 2019 data. Now, so I wonder what he's going to say. But he's a shameless man. You come here and bluster his way through the whole press conference, and the next time you talk to him, and he wouldn't acknowledge that that's foolish to make that point. Utterly foolish. He didn't look at the time series data, because we know that they haven't done any survey recently. And so it had to be old data. So they pointed out, in the clarification, they made it clear about, so they were saying poverty has come down. And you can check it for yourself. It says has dropped, so they clarified, from close to 61% in 2006 to around 48% in 2019. And they said it's 2019 data, and then it's not just Latin America and the Caribbean that they are comparing us with. That they issue this in the footnote, that it is a few countries in the upper middle income category that they were comparing Guyana with. So it's not the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean, Mr. Norton, if you're watching. So let me say a few things about this. So we have always had this issue. If you go back to studies, there's a Rampacard study that was done for CMAP that showed between 86 to 94% in 1991 of our people they were not getting enough nutrition. they needed food support. That is how CIMA was started, the Rampacast study. The World Bank did another poverty report in 1994 or so. And the report then was just 40-something% poverty. But they admitted that the methodology, you have different methodologies. One, you can assess poverty from an income perspective. You can assess it from an expenditure perspective, how much the household spend, or the income that they get. Or you can approach it from a basic needs perspective. And I'm simplifying. But if you go and look at the report. So, from an income perspective, we have always known that hinterland communities, many people work subsistence. So they don't earn wages. And the job opportunities are rare. So you always have higher rates of poverty in those areas. And then not everyone is truthful about income too. If you look at expenditure, again, in many communities, you have if it's subsistence, then it's not calculated as part of their expenditure because they don't go to the shop to buy the greens. They will produce the greens or something else, or vegetables or something else. So we've always known there is poverty. Don't get me wrong. There is poverty in Guyana. I'm not saying there isn't poverty. We recognize that acutely. We're the ones who established the poverty reduction strategy. You recall we had the low carbon development strategy, the national development strategy, we had the poverty reduction strategy. And if you look at those reports, you will see the progress we've made from the early years. In the hinterland communities, if you measure access to basic services now, those have grown significantly. Because under the ACNU days, there were no health huts, no water, practically nothing. The education institutions were absent. And we have made enormous progress in that regard, but we're still lagging behind job opportunities. And this is why we had each community for several years now work on a community development plan. And the objective was twofold. One, food security, and the other, employment creation. And we've made a commitment to fund those programs so in the villages themselves you'd have more employment opportunities. But you do still have pockets of rural and urban poverty. Now, it's relative to. At one stage, if you earn anything above $2, you are not considered to be in extreme poverty. So we have practically eliminated extreme poverty. Extreme poverty in Guyana in the early years, in those periods where people were earning less than $2 per day or consuming. That has been removed totally. Extreme poverty. It was 29%. So if you rebase, and I don't want to get into complex issues like you rebased it to $5.50, then suddenly you have more people falling below the poverty line. We understand this, we're trying to tackle it. But now that we know that you were talking about poverty on the APNU, let me tell you why the survey may have found all of these figures. So the PNC APNU in 2016 sent home 1,972 Amerindian CSOs. They were earning $40,000 or $30,000 a month. Not a large sum of money. When you calculate on an annual basis, it's over $700 million that PNC took away from the Amerindian villages. Now, assuming one of those persons had a family of 3 or 4, they were helping to sustain them. You're not talking about 2,000 persons. You're talking about maybe 6,000 to 8,000 people who got affected because they took away the jobs from their mothers and fathers or their sisters and brothers. That is APNU record. And you come and tell us, oh, you're concerned about poverty. And try to pin it on the PPP, not knowing that the years that were measured, the measurement period was 2019, your period in office. So that is the first thing. If you go to places like Blackbush Polder, not Blackbush Polder, Kanji, or Wales, you saw it at Wales, when they shut down the sugar factories, 7,000 people lost their jobs in that period. If they had 4 or 5 persons in a family, if it's 5, it's 35,000 people got affected. People couldn't send their kids to school. That is what probably was measured then. So a lot of these things might be accurate because of the timing when they came in and did the survey, 2019. At that time, the country had lost 30,000 jobs. In mining, we lost a lot of jobs because, like now, we can't get back to mining because of the rainfall. But that, under APNU, where they put on, they increased the tax on the sliding scale, the tributors tax, they then put a tax on these value-added tax on equipment, etc. We lost jobs in mining, we lost jobs in retail trade, we lost jobs in the forestry sector. Sugar workers were sent off. Over 30,000 people lost jobs. If you say 4 in a family, that's 120,000 people got affected. Anyone measuring poverty at that time would have concluded the same thing. So, Mr. Norton, what they were speaking about, what they measured, the failure of the APNU government in the last, they increased poverty because they just had a spending spree on things that didn't matter because they didn't invest on the capital budget, yet they spent over $1 trillion in the 5 years, spent over $1 trillion, and 419.5 billion Ghana dollars in the period after the no confidence vote without parliamentary oversight. That's what they are measuring. The incompetence of APNU, their taxation policy, the growth in poverty under APNU. And so he tried to pin it on the PPP. Let me tell you, but we have to go back into history to see the history of the party that Mr. Norton represents. In 1990, I wanted to show you a graph. This is it here. Guess what this is? This is Guyana's per capita income. Now, that's important. That's per capita GDP. And guess what period you think we're looking at? This here, just under $400. Guess what year? That was 1966. When we became independent. In 1990, look where it was, below that. That's what APNU took it to. Imagine we were poorer as a country in 1990 than when we became independent per capita GDP. And who ran this country in that entire period? Who ran this country in the entire period? It was with PNC. At that period, you recall, public servants, they pauperized public servants. Our wage was about the minimum wage was $3,000 or something like that. It worked out to $25 US a month. That was the minimum wage there. How many vehicles? We had less than 1% of this of Guyana owning vehicles in that period. Now practically everyone. We had nearly 100,000 houses less than we have today, because people were living 4 or 5 in a household. People were fleeing the country, didn't have food to eat. That is why CIMAP was started, to give food support to people. Food for work, it used to be called. That is the sordid history of the PNC. And so when they talk about helping Guyana and Afro-Guyanese, all of us suffered, everybody. Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, all Guyanese suffered in that period because of the hopeless, the economic mismanagement and the rigging of elections, because we didn't have freedom. That's their legacy to the people of this country. So we dug ourselves out of that hole, literally, by working for nearly 20 years in very difficult circumstances. The street protests, supporting the criminals. They were in charge of the parliament from 2012, almost 8 years, cut the budgets. Not 5 years they were in office, almost 8 years they controlled the budget. And in spite of that, our country made progress. You saw what the IMF report said, that because of repaying debts and prudent management, debt management strategy. That is the change. When they left office, they left us poorer than when we became independent. When the rest of the world was moving forward, in that same period, places like Singapore and South Korea and the others, they went from poorer countries than Guyana. They were poorer than Guyana in the early 60s to almost developed world status. And we retrogressed. We went downwards. We were competing with Haiti. That is their legacy on development and poverty in Ghana. So, how did they fare in their 5 years? As I said to you, the same thing happened. Imagine this guy would complain. He walks down the street, he says, oh, the houses are too small for people. Now the starter homes we're building. He has absolutely nothing to do. Absolutely, before I talk about that, he complains about Air Finale salary. And he probably makes about $1 million a month. He has a driver and vehicle and everything else. And he complains about the president's salary in one of his press conferences. You recall the last one, that Air Finale gets too much money. This guy does absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing, and he gets the money. Air Finale busy working every day, goes to work. He goes to Bamba Mali. That's where he goes. That's all he does. And then he comes up and he says the houses are too small, these starter homes. They didn't put up no starter home or so. In fact, in Linden they tried to block the 400 house lots and now the 1,000 homes we're going to build. You ask them how many houses they built in Linden. I said it before. Who got the land? In Figueroa and Lowenfield and the others, large tracts of land. And he's from Linden. Ask him about, tell people in Linden about that. And then you'll find out about it. We have a program. We said 50,000 house lots. We didn't promise to build homes, but we're building homes. We're assisting people in various categories, even now with a subsidy, to get this done, because we believe it's crucial. But he complains about that too. The houses are too small, or it would create social problems. These are starter homes for people. Now, I have a couple of things more I wanted to talk about. So let me go quickly through this. So he's unhappy about that. But Rosedale Ford, I was saying, might be right when he said that this guy is useless and a racist, if I'm paraphrasing him. So about elections. So now he got cornered about not contesting. He's just playing the fool. Oh, I'm keeping my cards close to my chest. He will contest, don't worry with that. You know, he's going to decide what to do, and he's consulting with his people know what's going on. Pure nonsense he's talking. Norton very well knows that the list didn't cause them to lose. They've always, most of the time, they've lost the elections because of bad policies. Bad policies. If you change, why do you want people to vote for you and their lives don't improve when you're in office? How can you want that? You have to start establishing a track record and have a list of achievements and ask people to vote for you on that basis. Not race or emotion or claim you've been cheated. They've been cheated. Or some internal PPP poll said he's going to win the next elections. He got to be high from Bamba Mali again. I don't know about the internal PPP poll that would say Norton. If we had a poll like that, I'd retire from politics tomorrow. Immediately. But don't ever say or utter another political word in this country to show that Norton is winning. But that was all to deflect about the attempt to rig the internal elections. I think when the reporters asked him about rigging the elections against Annette Ferguson, he got caught and got a bit flustered. So he said a PPP internal poll was leaked to him. But when the reporter asked him, do you have the poll? He said, no, I don't have it. But he heard of it. It's the same thing he said to me, oh, I have the SOPs, and the next day he lied and said, oh, I didn't really say that. This is a small-minded, petty leader of the opposition, the worst that the PNC has ever produced. PNC had people of stature, even if I didn't agree with them. This is a diminution of the PNC to levels that I've never seen before, and I've been around politics a long time. He has a lot of bravado, but nothing else. He then tries to, he said, should I go on to this about inflation? He said, I'm supposed to be an economist and I didn't know something on inflation, but his solution for inflation is that you got to spend more money, and once you get an increase in productivity, it makes sense, but look at the whole context of what he said. It's pure nonsense. Utter nonsense again. Utter nonsense again. So let me don't waste too much time on Norton. I plan to come here and talk about Norton and his ineptitude and all of that, but I'm getting bored of talking about him. And frankly speaking, I'm lost for words, because the thoughts that keep coming to my head, I can't actually verbalize those thoughts. So before I get into trouble, let me move on. You see that one last thing, when he speaks about corruption, I want him to just look at, he likes to quote reports, see the IMF last report, the same report, the Article 4 consultations that were published in September. Staff commend the authorities' progress in strengthening Guyana's anti-corruption framework and fiscal transparency and support for the advances. So we got commended for strengthening the anti-corruption framework and fiscal transparency. They're talking about the National Procurement and Tender Administration. You know about the breaches there. Patterson taking things to the cabinet directly, flouting the tender laws. Practically the tender board didn't function. They spoke about the Integrity Commission. It didn't function on the APNU. People are submitting their reports and stuff. So he should, since he wants to quote the report, this report highly in praise of the government of Guyana for strengthening the anti-corruption framework. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is our friend Rickford Burke. I think this guy is running mad. And what is happening is that he gets very upset when people point out his criminal endeavors, his attempt to extort businessmen here. But Rickford Burke is a con man. I know him for a long time. I think he was replaced from the PNC for Mr. Hodge threw him out because he fingered some funds there too. And then he ran off to New York, and he's been using this organization, which operates from his basement, to raise funds from people. So he's a con man, and the worst thing you can do to a con man is to expose them. That means you're dealing with a source of funding. He doesn't work anywhere. What work does he do? I don't know. He claimed one time he was a lawyer, but I don't know if he practices, etc. His job, full-time job, is to extort money from businessmen. He just extended that to Guyana. We don't know how many other people he's done this to. So he comes after them in a hard way. He tried it at a political level, but he can't get that through with us. So he's going after the vulnerable businessmen who don't want to get their names in the media. It would affect their business. So I don't know how many other people he's extorted. This guy is a hardcore criminal. And I would just say to the elected leaders over there, stay far from him. He's just going to destroy their reputation too. But when they really find out the truth about him, I think that will happen. So don't listen to his shrill protestations and complaints about guilty share and everyone else. So thank you very much.
Pierre Wilbur, Kaizen News. Sir, a few questions on your opening statement. With respect to the oil blocks, the 11 that you said are in the shallow water, are there concerns about the interest of investors likely finding heavy oil? Because there was a lot of disinterest with Oranduke, which landed on Jadgeo and Joe, as well as Hamilton.
I don't know what the interest in the bid round will be. We're auctioning 14 blocks. There's a data room that will be created. We don't have data for all the areas. We have maybe some 2D seismic, 3D seismic for some areas. All the prospective bidders would have access to the data room. They will assess the data, then they will decide if they want to put in a bidder or not. Nobody is forcing anyone. Now, having said that, I hope Mr. Lal will, since he believes that this is a lucrative sector. And then I heard another person saying that there are ethical oil companies around the world who can do this for us, that all of the ethical ones and the locals, because they can put in a bid to and make all the money in the world. And I'm sure they would want to offer us even better fiscal terms than the one we've asked for, since it's so lucrative. So it's not you, I'm just communicating that to Mr. Lal through the medium of the press conference, because I suspect the reason he didn't come today, he owes me an apology. They've been talking a lot about solar is the way forward. And I said to him, bring any sort of power, the renewable, whatever. Get it on his program at 5 cents per kilowatt hour. He said it's being generated at 3. I said, we will give you a power purchase agreement at 5 cents per kilowatt hour. He said he could get a company to do that. I said, if you can't get that in, I think, 4 weeks, I expect a front page apology that you've been talking nonsense all along and misleading the people of this country. So he persists in the same thing, but he is not sent this company that he has or abroad who can make all of this money now to us to get this proposal, because we'd love to buy power at 8 cents, at 5 cents per kilowatt hour. The cost of the fuel alone, the bunker C4 is 13 cents per kilowatt hour. The fuel alone. So I hope that I get a front page. I know the editors can't do that, but I hope that he will issue the front page apology and say, I have been talking nonsense. I thought Norton had the monopoly of nonsense, but here, can do that. Because this talk about solar, I hear they quote 100 reports, oh, the solar is the way to go. Half of the people who are saying that, they don't run countries, they're sitting in an office in New York, writing a report, the UN or some agency. You need baseload power. And the only way it's going to come is a gas project, a combination of solar and the hydro. We can.
So,
yes, so that's the first one, right?
Yes. I also wanted to ascertain some clarity on the government-to-government partnerships. The President has said some blocks will be set aside for that sort of arrangement. Can you give us a bit more color on that, and what if you would be using an NOC vehicle to represent your interest there?
So we have not advanced that aspect as yet, but we do have the quarantine block that has been relinquished. We have the Ganchi block. The quarantine. Right, but yes. So now in the quarantine area, we have two blocks there that we didn't put out, and one offshore by the Kanchi area, and then in parts of the Demerara. So the 11 blocks came mainly from Oreo and part of Demerara. And so we have areas in Demerara in the quarantine, and then the shallow area. And we are expecting some relinquishment. So we can utilize those areas for.
And you will be using an NOC vehicle to represent your interest?
We're not sure. It depends on the interest. So we know a few countries have expressed, when the president was in Trinidad, they expressed an interest in that. I know, Qatar had expressed an interest. So now we have to engage, but that is outside of the bid round. And that is, if that moves forward, that means the government will participate in it. But we don't know what the terms will be as yet. We haven't advanced that work as yet. We're just trying to get this option on.
Off of your statement, sir, could you give us an update on the insurance negotiations with ExxonMobil Corporation, and with government putting out the landmark refinery tender? Is it the intention of government to make Guyana the refinery or refining powerhouse of the region?
So I'm glad you raised the second point. The first one is that negotiation takes place at the EPA level. So I am not aware. I've been really busy. I don't know how far they've gone with the discussions there. So we can easily find out about that. But we made it clear about they have to meet their commitments, what they signed up to. The refinery, we have received, I see every day people putting in, and I believe some of these companies are, you have a few serious companies and a lot of carpetbagging companies that have come here and said they can do refineries. They want an MOU from the government, and they go and talk. I see one said they could do 10,000 jobs in Berbice. It's all nonsense. A lot of it doesn't make sense. So to sift this through, to say we don't want people to come every day to us. They've been coming. We said we're not going to do a large refinery in the country. Because if we, say, go to 100,000 barrels a day, that means almost all of the government oil goes to, you have to have an agreement, an off-take agreement with the company. So almost all of our oil goes to that company. They control our oil practically, our share of oil. So that's one. And two, refineries are known to bring a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. They're not green, the technology is evolving. So we said we need, for national security, a small refinery in the country. So we're not looking to become the refinery capital of the region. Now so how do we trigger this? We don't want to own it in government, but how do we get all of these bidders to work together? We're only selling 25,000 barrels of crude per day to one person. Or not 25, 30,000. 30,000 barrels of crude to one. The bidder that wins, or is most serious on building this refinery. So in the document where we put out a proposal, we said, the government will provide the land, we'll give the tax concessions, we'll sell you 30,000. We are not giving you an agreement to sell fuel to the government. You can sell it wherever you want, provided the price is competitive. But in crises, we can easily restrict the export and sell it for domestic consumption. Because with supply chain disruptions, we could have any set of problems in the future. We're not taking any risk for the future. And so this is for national security purposes, to have energy security at home. We don't run out of gas or diesel or anything like that. We're pursuing this refinery, but not with government funds and through an open process. So everybody who says that they can build a refinery now, and I saw one said they want to build 4 refineries. Who is that though, by the way? I don't know who want to build 4 refineries. Introduce him to Norton for me. If you can do that, I get Norton to meet with him. It's not. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And so that's all we are supporting. That's all we are supporting. A 30,000 barrel a day refinery for Guyana. The others, we're not selling any crude to them.
Marcel Thomas from the
Yeah,
Stock
Marcel.
News. You've given the key fiscal terms of what would be the new model PSA. I wanted to know, that PSA has to be completed before the date of the auction is announced.
Yeah,
I'm asking.
no, but we are hoping that it would be available. Work is ongoing and it's just strengthening. So we believe it would be available in a short period. Let me say that.
That's the new model PSA.
Yeah, yes, the new one.
And have you,
The key things were the fiscal, but there are loopholes in other areas, and it's not consistent, I'm told, with some modern looking PSA.
and have you set a tentative date for the
launch of that will be determined in the course of the next few days. But I said a time frame that we hope to complete it in a 5 months period, which could be around the end of the first quarter,
of 2023?
23. Yeah,
But
but it's 5 months. 5 months, around 5 months. Yes, please.
Tamika Garnett, Guyana Chronicle. Sorry, I'm let go. Going a little bit outside of your statement, can we get a sort of an update on the Amilo Falls Hydro Project? The Canadian High Commission recently hinted that they are in discussions with the government to work out a possible way forward of them taking over the project. In the mention of the gas to shore, you gave us an update, but can you say how, if you know, how progress has been coming in negotiations with the private landowners in terms of getting the land that is necessary for the pipeline? And another thing of the statement, earlier this year, the government set aside $5 billion in the budget for cost of living measures to help with that. We saw the $25,000 for the hinterland and riverine households, the $1 billion for the fertilizer, and the $28,000 for the pensioners, which was the most recent one. Can you say if we have already exhausted the entire $5 billion, or if we will be seeing, if there's money left over, if we will be seeing any other measure before the end of the year? I'm going to stop at those 3 questions for now.
So let me start with the negotiations. The Attorney General led this, the discussions on the land issue, and he has assured me that starting this weekend, they're going to be signing up the agreements with a number of landowners there who will receive their compensation shortly. There may be a few people who don't agree with the negotiations, so the land will be compulsorily acquired there if they don't agree with the negotiations. And then that matter will proceed. But we believe the right of way will be ready soon for the project. It's right now it is not a humbug to the advancement of the project. The second issue, I can't tell you exactly. I know it should be, because with the hinterland and riverine allowance that was given out, the cash grant, it should bring it close to the $5 billion. Right now, there are no further plan that we have to give out, and once we complete the pensioners one, that's been ongoing. We don't have any further plan, but that could change. That could change any time when, based on an assessment of the fiscal. We're reviewing the fiscal now. Only a few days ago, I got from the Minister of Finance the framework to see how we're doing for the year so far. Clearly, there need to be, he has to go back to Parliament to seek supplementary for some unforeseen expenditure. So we'll make a determination about that in the future. I forgot to mention that when Norton was talking about, when I mentioned about poverty. And just imagine, I mentioned about the Amerindian and the sugar workers, about the loss of their income in that period. But also, the children lost their $1.6 billion in the 10,000 grant. They lost $1.6 billion of income. And he's feeling surprised as why the poverty rate skyrocketed. Under us, since we got into office this year, about $6.3 billion has been paid out to the children of our country. So they're over $6 billion richer than they were in August when we got into office. That's why they got this year, and that's per annum, and it will grow further. So I just wanted, I know you're shivering, it's cold?
Yeah, it's a bit cold, but that's okay.
Right, and what was the third
The other
one?
question was the Amila Falls Hydro Project.
Oh, yes.
And talks with the Canadian.
The Canadian. So I don't know about that. We met with a group that came with a Korean delegation from Hyundai, and they said they want to submit a proposal, and it will be, we made it clear that we don't want an EPC, we want to buy power. So the last project failed because the Chinese firm that won the bid wanted to shift from the boot arrangement to an EPC, and we then annulled the award because we could not do that. That was not what we tendered for. So we don't have a problem reviewing any terms or any proposal coming from anyone, but it has to be favorable. Our plan was to work with the US and a few others. When the president was there, I didn't go, although we were in Washington together. They met with the Department of Energy. They had an interest in rescoping the project. And we may, if all of that fails, if the direct proposals fail, then we will retender the project sometime next year.
Okay, can you say anything about what's going on with the cost recovery audit of Exxon post 2017?
No, I don't keep track of it on a daily basis, but you can ask the ministry. They would know exactly because they would be in touch with the consultants.
Okay, I know that your last press conference you had mentioned where it concerns local government elections that your party is ready, but local government elections, the date has been set, nomination date is here, we have the symbols have to be submitted later this month. Can you just touch and give us a comment on where the state of the things are in the PPC camp as it pertains to local government elections? And my other question, is there anything that can be said on the way forward on the replacement for Mr. Chardas Prasad and
No, I don't think that matter has been discussed as yet because I'm not even aware. He's been recalled, and so we clearly have to have a replacement, but that matter has not been discussed as yet. The
other question was how are things in the PPC camp?
Oh yes, we're ready for elections. We generally, because we contest in all the local government bodies, even when we're in opposition, we did so. APNU doesn't contest, even when they're in government. 5 years, they didn't contest in every area. We contested in every NDC in town. So we have a kind of elaborate process, and we allow people to work on the names from the bottom up, but we give guidance about what we expect from people and the messaging. And so we've done that, and we're in the process of vetting candidates. And so we're ready for the elections whenever they come in March.
My final question, I know I'm asking a lot. You mentioned something that piqued my interest. There was a health insurance scheme created by the APNU AFC during their government to pay for them to get health care from Ireland or something. Can you say does your government know how much money was expended under this plan and how much is owed? If it's something that
let me tell you something, and I need to confess and apologize to a lot of the people who used to listen to the press conferences because they get calls, and they used to call me and say, I hope when the PPP gets into office that there will be a follow-up on these issues, that you'll go after all of these people. We have been so busy trying to not to get bogged down only on running after them. Although we know that they did some egregious wrong to the country, and a whole spate of corrupt, very selfish policies were instituted by the leadership of APNU. That we have focused more on getting things happening, the big projects, getting initiatives going and stuff. We have been a bit delinquent on that. And maybe now, and because of that, Cathy Hughes can come and talk about corruption. Or Norton can talk about housing program, because people have short memories. And he can talk about Irfan Ali's salary, which is the same salary that Mr. Granger had. In fact, on the APNU, I will just mention it again, they changed the law so that former presidents could not get medical benefits, limited. And I didn't bother with them. I didn't need their help on medical side, but I went to the court. The court ruled that we were eligible. And not just myself, Sam and Donald Ramatar. And what happened? So he changed the law, and he's the first president who was ineligible for medical help, former president, Mr. Granger. But we're paying the medical bills. Now, we could have been as vindictive as they are, because he's not entitled by law, we are. But they changed the law. So it's a lot of vindictiveness that drove them. You recall about the wages increase and stuff like that they took just as they got into office. I can list the corruption. If I'm just sit here and think through the ministries, I can give you 30 cases of serious corruption where people should have been charged by now. But you're right that we did not go, and maybe people are a bit upset that we did not do enough of that, and that's why these guys are emboldened. A man like Mahipal or these others could come and talk about corruption today. It's something you were actually. Maybe I should just ease off on the other work a bit and focus a bit on that and ask the police what's going on. Because all the land deals and everything that they just sold off without any documentation. So I would find out a bit about that one. The health. Yes.
Has government decided to restrict participation for companies already in the basin in the auction?
No, I said that at the beginning. Open to every company.
Okay. CGX announced recently another of a few delays in the drilling for their upcoming well in the quarantine zone. Have you, as a government, received correspondence to say that they probably might not make this year in terms of drilling that block?
I am not aware what the ministry received. Mm-hmm. I know that they're not making their commitment. So there has to be a serious discussion with them. The last time we had a discussion led to the relinquishment of some of the other areas and the focus on their commitment here. So if they can't meet that commitment, then something has to happen. And I guess at the appropriate time, we'll meet with them, but we will focus on getting this auction done. And some of the things that are built in here, you would have heard, hopefully would prevent that sort of thing from happening.
Okay.
When people miss schedules.
Okay, yeah. Just two more questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
You were president at the same time as Brazil's new president-elect, Lula. Could you speak to how you expect Guyana's relationship with that country to evolve following the transfer of power? And secondly, could you state categorically that the new fiscal terms you just discussed do not apply to the Startup Law?
Yes, they do not. Exxon will be happy with you for that clarification. And so that's clear. And I'm hoping, I know Lula well. Lula is an amazing person. And Lula did a lot to change Brazil's international image. That's why he's so admired. He reached out, we had relationships. You know, it started off with Cardoso, President Cardoso, when we had the 12 countries were trying to bring UNASUR together, the 12 countries in South America. Not UNASUR. Yeah, yes, it's so Lula came in, replaced Cardoso, and he gave energy to that initiative. And we in Guyana benefited significantly from that, because suddenly the continent didn't see us as aliens. Before, they used to have this impression that, oh, we're some British colony locked away and stuff. So we got more integrated with Latin America, particularly South America, and the countries started to know us and accept us as a South American country. Lula warmed up relations with Africa. He helped a lot there, helped us in Ghana. He brought several of his ministers here to work on various initiatives on energy, etc. So we've been talking about this energy corridor, trying to coordinate our energy infrastructure. I'm sure that it will get a big boost, that initiative under President Lula. He was supportive of the road. He was the one who funded in his tenure and opened the bridge across the river, Takatu River. So I'm looking forward to him taking over and the relationship that he's had with Guyana. Brazil is a very important country for us, and he has made it clear to his position, as is Bolsonaro, Brazil's position on the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy. They believe the borders are settled.
That's recent?
No, but that's what I'm saying before. But I'm sure he is not changed that. Brazil is not. Yes. Oh, are you waiting? I'm late. Let me give her right here.
All right, Speaker Rodney, TVN. Dr. Jadgeo, there have been continuous calls for salary increases for public servants. I know you mentioned earlier that Cabinet is seeking to have supplementary funding and so on. Can you say if these increases are in the pipeline for public servants? And
Yes, there is an increase, public service increase. That's already budgeted for. We don't even need a supplementary for that.
All right, and can you speak to the unexpected expenditures that the supplementary funding is being sought for?
Yeah, not now. You would see that the Minister of Finance will deal with that at some point in time. We're just reviewing the numbers now. I just got the numbers. So we will, at some point in time, you'll see it. In fact, there'll be no secret. It will have to be debated in the Parliament.
Can you say what the increases would look like?
No, not I don't deal with that, but there will be an increase. Yes.
Okay, two clarifications for our next questions. You listed quite a few things that need to happen to facilitate the auction. All of this will happen within the 5 months period, or you may go ahead without some of this. So you have petroleum.
Yeah.
Everything will happen within.
Yes. The things I said here, all happening. A lot of them were more decisions to guide us. So who will be doing the auction and all of that. So
the law changes, petroleum.
The Petroleum Act, yes, if necessary, can all be changed in
Okay.
3 months.
And just the signing bonus is biddable.
Yes, so you can. That's a minimum.
You can
so
go
you
above.
can go above, yeah. You can go below, but you can definitely go above.
All right. Christopher Rahman said that the natural resource funds overstated by tens of billions. How accurate is this?
I stopped listening to this guy a long time ago. What does he mean it's overstated by 10 million?
Tens of billions.
Tens of billions?
Millions.
Tens of millions?
US dollars?
Okay, see, it overstated by enough. Basically, sir.
I know. Because I need to get what he means by that. Because it can't be overstated. It means that we're we're getting more money into the fund than we're entitled to.
No, that's
No,
not
that's not
what
what he said. He said the amount that you have there is more than is actually in the fund.
The amount we
No,
have.
That you have stated. Okay, let her.
No, so what he said is that the money that goes into the natural resource fund, there's a portion of it that belongs to the Guyana Revenue Authority to satisfy the tax payment, after which GRA is
Yes,
supposed to-
that old
yeah,
argument, yes, I'm not wasting my time with that, that's an old argument. It's coming into the coffers of the country, so that not a cent is unaccounted for. Not a cent is unaccounted for. He is arguing that some of it should be in a different revenue stream. One should be a revenue stream to GRA versus to the Natural Resources Fund. But every cent is accounted for, so it's accurate here. You can have the difference.
And Vincent Adams had a lot to say in the press about.
Oh, really? He's still around?
Yes, yes. The increase in production and that Exxon is going over the safe limits, taking advantage of the government of Guyana. Are you concerned about the safety?
On that issue, I'm not going to take Vincent on, but we have to look at everything. The EPA should examine it. If they're going above a limit that is considered safe, then they can examine it. I don't want to get into this guy because he's has been and griping all the time, and he had his period there and he gave some of the worst environmental permits we've ever seen that we had to rectify. He gave environmental permit without any regard for flaring and all of that. Didn't have a number of things like cradle to grave management of waste. I don't want to get back into that. I've dealt with that 100 times before, so I just want to move on from the gripers. Because somehow I believe it's circular. So the EPA should examine what he's saying, whether it is so, and we should find out from Exxon. And I'll raise it with the ministry.
So, sorry, you had said that the criteria for evaluating the bids for the auctions will be weighted between the work program and the signature bonus.
Yes, yeah.
I have two additional questions. Is there any concern about the inflationary pressures for the fifth project, or because we take on that ExxonMobil? How is government dealing with that to lower cost requirements?
We can't do anything to lower costs. We don't control the production of the goods and services that they will buy, or procure. So we can't do anything. If you're asking whether we should give maybe breaks, tax breaks or so to offset some of the costs, the answer is no. We believe even with the increased costs, that the project economics would be good enough to make these projects viable.
And finally, we're seeing specifically with Burmese, there's a deep water port, government is putting the training center here as well. And we're also seeing the refinery being positioned to be here as well. Is it government's intention to bring Burmese into the geographic oil and gas?
We have not made a secret about it, but the deep water port is a difficult proposition given the river, which would lead to sedimentation a lot, bring it down. So we're getting the studies we're doing are not all favorable, but we do need a deep water port. So we believe that the development in the Demerara River can be a huge growth pole for these regions. And we're trying to shift some of the, because on this side of the river, the price of land and it's already built up. We're trying to shift some of the development across the river, along from Wales all the way to the mouth of the river with new ports, etc. The bridge, the 4-lane fixed bridge, will help to de-risk and incentivize anyone who wants to invest on the other side. Because you can bring in your container there, you don't have to have weight restriction, you don't have to wait on bridge opening, you drive across anytime, back and forth. So that locating across the river will not be a problem. It wouldn't affect the logistic chain. So that's why that bridge is so crucial there too. So region 4 and 3, these are the two most populous regions in our country. Now, we believe that the development effect can go into region 5, parts of region 5, maybe up to Maiponi, people can travel. If we cut transit time by a 4-lane road to the highway, and maybe 4-lane up to Mahaica, you can then come in from Mahaica in 20 minutes into the city. And now we're working on the cross streets like Conversation 3 and other areas. The Ogle bypass will come back at the back into our Bibarka Road, so you can come into the city from that direction. So you don't have a choke point by the Russian embassy. So bringing the traffic into the city so you don't have bottlenecks, making sure that transit time is reduced would allow people to live further out. So all those lands would be developed, the housing, businesses wouldn't mind going out there further. And also, people wouldn't mind traveling to work in the city because it's a short thing, they don't have to wait 3 hours, 2 hours in a traffic jam. So that's why there's a big push to get these highways done to cut transit time. When we pave the Linden Highway, we already have the money, $200 million, to pave the highway, so from Soestdijk right into Linden. So that would allow people even from Region 10 to come down and work in these areas and maybe go back up because you can move swiftly. It's harder to take as many jobs there. So we believe Region 5 and 6, which are also populous regions, Region 5 and 6, the growth pole again could be the Berbice River. And people all the way from upriver and the two regions they can have a series of activities. That's why the development around Palmyra area, you have a stadium, well not a cricket, but a stadium going. Providence also became a growth pole for the two regions, just across the river. So also there, you have a couple of hotels there at Palmyra, some malls there, a whole range of development in that area, high-end housing and all of that. And then with development in the river itself. So a lot of people from Region 5, maybe all the way up to Maiponi, from Maiponi going back that way, and then from Kraboot Creek can come and work there. And New Amsterdam, all of those areas. So that's the planning, is to create these growth poles because it's harder. And so the only way we can do that is to shift some of the economic activities here. We're saturated in this area here with hotels and almost everything else. That's why we do have labor shortages in some skill areas in Region 4. But you have abundant labor in these areas. So that's the plan. I think we've spoken a bit about it, but maybe one day we need to sit down and let people see the big picture, what our thinking is.
Finally, sir, you've seen phenomenal success with the local content legislation, especially the water areas. You projected that Guyana would pull in about $700 million annually with these areas. What's your take on the performance of the legislation today? How many more sectors do you want to see?
We have to review. We have to review our experience. So at the end of the year, we will review our experience. We have to review and have an assessment of our capacity, how it has grown, if it has deteriorated, how if we we set the bar too high in some areas or too low, and then make adjustments accordingly. So at the end of the year, that will be done. So we're a bit of it is still learning and feeling our way, but as you said, it is a great success. We're one of the few countries in the world that did this so early, and a lot of our people now are benefiting from it. Yes. Okay, thank you very much.